My name is Brittany Aubain, filling in for Gary Axelbank, and welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters, writers, editors, and all sorts of different artists, mostly focused here in the Bronx, to find out what has the Bronx buzzin'. In our second segment, we take a look at a new manga that is brewing here in the Bronx. To start off the show, we take a look at Bronxites who are scared of being left out of the booming cannabis industry. To discuss this issue, we are joined by reporter for the Mott Haven Herald, Dashiell Allen. Dashiell, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So, before we get to the article, I'd like to know a little bit more about you.
Awesome. Yeah. So I am currently a graduate student at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism um, with a concentration in bilingual reporting. So I'm fluent in Spanish, and I love to connect to the Latino community here in the Bronx and in New York City as a whole. And I've been reporting recently for the Mott Haven Herald and the Hunts Point Express, which cover South Bronx neighborhoods, on cannabis, on housing, on many different issues.
Awesome. So, what made you decide to write on this topic?
Well, it's something that's been interesting me for the past few months, and I felt like cannabis is a big topic in the media right now. A lot of coverage has been focusing on the illegal storefronts that are popping up around the city, and how there's only three uh, licensed storefronts that have been allowed to that have opened so far. And I felt like there was another angle that was missing, and this really interesting coalition has just been founded recently called Bronx that is saying, "Hey, what's going on for the people who have been historically were the for lack of a better word, the victims of the war on drugs, who had cannabis convictions. How are they going to get into the industry?" And that felt like something that hadn't been talked about as much.
No, absolutely. We are seeing that all around the Bronx, and we're going to get into the storefronts a little later. But just, can you explain how exactly are residents of the Bronx and all across New York City, how are they being left out of the cannabis industry?
Right. So what's going on basically is that starting so the it's quite technical actually.
Hmm.
And I think that's actually part of the confusion here is the state, since first legalizing cannabis in 2021 with the Marijuana Taxation and Regulation Act, has said that it would prioritize people from disadvantaged communities that were had cannabis convictions. And what those people are saying now is that they really need money and resources, and that there's not an easy pathway for them into the industry without those resources. And they feel like the state has come up short.
Absolutely. And, the article mentions the story of Jason Morales. Just
Yes.
how common are stories like this?
So I don't know how I can't speak exactly to how
Mhm.
common stories like this are. One thing I've heard speaking to some of the activists that are the community activists that are involved in this is that a lot of people who might be potentially interested in entering the industry are actually afraid to or not speaking up, not interested in speaking to the press right now because they're concerned that might affect their possibilities in the future. But the sense I'm getting is that it's pretty, and not even just. I think the other thing is that there's been a lot of focus on dispensaries and selling cannabis,
Mhm.
but what people are saying to me is that they're interested in how can communities benefit from the industry in other ways as well, or how can the multi-billion-dollar industry create investment in those communities, such as Hunts Point and Mott Haven, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just how hard and complex is it to get into the cannabis industry?
Right. So far, the state has issued what are called provisional licenses. The official term is conditional adult use retail dispensary licenses, CARD for short. And they were for people that were historically disadvantaged and historically had cannabis convictions, but they also had to have been business owners for the past 2 years successfully
Mhm.
and have all their finances in place and fit a lot of different criterias. So that already left out a lot of people who hadn't been business owners before in the past. Now, what the state is doing is it is preparing to issue licenses to social equity. That's what they're calling it, social equity applicants, starting next year, which would be open to anybody who had a cannabis conviction. But the question there is whether there will be funds available for them to just not even just the application fee, which is $1,000, and then another $7,000 for a retail license. But then what about the lawyers? What about getting a space? What about getting a loan from the bank? All the different aspects that go into opening a business, any business really, not even just cannabis. Um, and additionally, there's some language in the proposed regulations that that activists that Bronx, which is this coalition, have taken question with, such as one that I think is strange is you have to demonstrate good moral character, and they say we don't even know what that means exactly. It's sort of undefined. So there's just a lot of potential barriers and a lot of paperwork. Also, a lot of you have to present a business plan, and it's not necessarily accessible to the average Bronx resident.
Absolutely, 100%. I was just recently at that Canna Bronx rally, not too long ago, and I remember speaking to some of the heads there, and they were saying, and they were saying a lot about how just the obstacles and just how much it takes to go. It's not just about getting a license, like you mentioned. It's about getting lawyers and it's just practically, a whole team and just building this whole business. And like you said, it's not suitable for the average person, specifically living in the Bronx. However, Bronxites were, as you mentioned, the victims of the war on drugs. So it's really frustrating to see that now that the people who suffered most can't even now benefit from the legalities of it and create their own businesses and be able to make a living off of it. And it's going to be once again dominated by big businesses. So, what can be done to further prevent discrimination?
Right. So I think what's important right now is Bronx is they're actually planning a trip to Albany at the end of March, I believe it is, right before the state budget is due, and they're asking for investment in the state budget for cannabis equity, for social equity applicants.
Mhm.
They're saying that roughly 20, I believe it's $20 million. Yeah, $20 million are going towards enforcement of cannabis regulations. So at least $20 million should go towards supporting the ventures of people that were impacted.
Yeah, we're hoping to see that in the future. And we're hoping that those resources are allocated to the proper people because once again, the average Joe who suffered, we're going to be left out. And it is frustrating to see that, higher ups are going to be reaping the benefits and once again, taking over. So that really is frustrating. And as you mentioned earlier about a lot of these storefronts, with how hard it is to get a cannabis license, do you think this is why the city is seeing such a huge increase in smoke shops selling cannabis?
I I think that's a that's probably likely part of the reason. It it only, I think I haven't done very much reporting specifically related to those storefronts, but that would make sense to me. Although I do think it's important to point out that the 3 that have opened so far have been in all been in Lower Manhattan.
Okay.
So there is no cannabis dispensary or no legal licensed cannabis dispensary in the Bronx or even in Upper Manhattan. So
Okay.
I think that's part of what's leading to that, because there definitely is a demand there. Um, and actually, of those 3 that are open, 2 of them are run by nonprofits.
Oh, wow.
Um, so one is the Doe Fund, and the other is Housing Works, and they're nonprofits that serve and employ people that had cannabis convictions, but they aren't directly being managed by people that were directly affected. And then there's one that is, but I think that's also another aspect that to point out.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And based on your experience of, in writing the article and kind of speaking with people and overseeing what's been going on, what advice do you have for Bronxites who want to get into the cannabis industry, but they're seeing a lack of resources, how do you encourage them to get involved in different aspects to kind of help push the needle forward?
Well, what I think is really great actually is that there's so many community organizations that are involved in this. There's Mothers on the Move is one of them, founded by Wanda Salomon, who's a local Longwood, Hunts Point resident, an activist. The Bronx Defenders also has started a Bronx Cannabis Hub, and I know that they helped out during the during the past licensing cycle. They
Mhm.
helped people to obtain licenses. So I think that really there's lots of organizations that are working towards this goal.
Yeah.
And I would say advice would just be to connect with them.
I'd like to thank Dashiell for joining us on the program. You can keep up with more of his stories on the Mott Haven Herald website, as well as the Hunts Point Express website. We'll be right back.
Every day, thousands of kids start vaping. And I can't let this happen to my kid. Of course, it's awkward to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping. Hey, bestie, how sketch is vaping? It's hard to get their attention. Ready? Go. Yes, look at that. You didn't even turn yours over. So if you want to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping, you have to get it trending. Right, Backpack Kid?
Let's do it.
First, invite your kid to do the vape talk. Let's try this. All right.
Why is he here?
Yeah, I gotta get it trending, honey.
Come on.
To the left. To the right. Let's go.
Oh, honey, can we talk?
Yeah, what's up?
I see a lot of your friends vaping.
Visit talkaboutvaping.org for tips on when and how to have the vape talk.
Found my heart out there in the open. Trees make you feel smaller. Can't help but get broken.
Feel the beat of nature at a park or forest near you. Find a forest and music inspired by nature at discovertheforest.org.
You're not gonna get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
I'm an ex-drug dealer, and I'll be your sub today. Can you see anything different as a pill?
No.
You don't know?
Fentanyl is being mixed into everything now. There's only one thing that will save somebody's life. That is naloxone nasal spray.
Fentanyl, it's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable.
Why would drug dealers put a lethal dose of fentanyl in drugs if they know it's so harmful?
Really just all about the money.
I just didn't realize that one pill could change your whole life.
More kids should know.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff, like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
Welcome back. Calico is a manga about a Bronx born antihero aiming to protect animals from being abused. Joining us to discuss this is the creator of Calico and Sigma Comics, H.H. German. H.H., thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Brittany.
So, let's just get into it. When did you come up with Sigma Comics?
Well, came up with Sigma Comics in 2020, in the beginning stage of the quarantine of the COVID pandemic. I came up with Calico years before. The idea of Calico started as a novel, and in tinkering with it during the pandemic, it was clear that a comic book format was a great way to get it out to the masses.
Absolutely. Listen, that quarantine had everybody, being creative, and it gave us time to be creative and come up with new things. So creating Sigma Comics, I know, was probably a great, way to pass the time for you. So what is the inspiration behind Calico?
Well, the inspiration really is some experiences I had some years back. I'm a former fighter from the Bronx, boxing and mixed martial arts, and mainly boxing. But there were times where I had come across some people who were abusing animals, and that didn't sit well with me. And the idea started from there: a hero that could fight against people who abuse animals.
It's a great way to use your platform, and you say that Calico is an anti-hero. And I feel like anti-hero is something that we've heard so much in like pop culture for like the past 6 months, specifically with certain music and television. So can you elaborate a little bit on the anti-hero?
Sure, the anti-hero is an archetype that possesses all of the heroic traits, but isn't perfect, and certainly goes about affecting heroic acts in non-heroic ways. So, or maybe in heroic ways, but not in the traditional heroic sense. So, a
Right.
typical anti-hero would be, let's say, the Punisher. Marvel Comics, the Punisher. If you're familiar with that guy, he takes care of the bad guys, but he doesn't tie them up and leave them for Commissioner Gordon. So he takes care of business, and that's exactly what Hector Gill, the Calico, is. He's somebody who puts an end to animal abuse permanently. There's no rehabilitation.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And just tell me a little bit about why did you decide to go down the anti-hero route?
Well, I just think that animal cruelty it's a horrible fixture, unfortunately, in our society. And it's one that is full of enormous passion, because more and more, people aren't seeing animals as these things that live out in the forests or in the jungles or in the skies. More and more, they're our friends, they're our family members. So when you have that kind of growing passion towards a certain, group on our planet, the response to, malady performed on those isn't. It's not enough to just, call the cop. Pick up the phone and dial 911. It stirs enormous amount of passion, and of course, once you have passion, you have danger, you have all these malignant elements. Then you can create an atmosphere for an environment for drama and a character like the Calico.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned just a few moments ago that you were a boxer and participated in MMA. So tell me about how your boxing career influenced Calico.
Well, the experiences, of course, and you can, as a reader, you can benefit and sort of dive into all those little nooks and crannies of experience through reading Here Comes Calico, whether the comic book format or the manga, the Japanese comic, which they read, of course, right to left in a digest booklet. But it's all the intricacies, the detail, of being in a fight. You know, a lot of people, a lot of comic book writers today, they haven't never been in a fight. And, you know, this is essential. Conflict is an essential aspect of comics.
Mhm.
That's the whole point is pitting good versus evil and creating the hero and how the hero defeats the villain. Well, if you haven't had any conflict versus, you know, any kind of malady, it's kind of hard to write about that. So I grew up fighting in New York City, in the streets of the Bronx, and in boxing gyms. So I have a very firm understanding of how that all works. So people who want to learn about that would certainly enjoy reading Here Comes Calico because it does get pretty technical.
Definitely, I think having that experience just enhances the story a lot more, like you said, in a way, how can you write about something or create something that you don't really know about or have experience about? So it enhances the story, and then, it kind of, you get this audience, this specific audience, because they can relate to that, as you mentioned. So
That's
we
right.
know that boxing influenced Calico.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about how manga and comics influenced you?
Sure. Well, as a little boy in the Bronx, so my family's from the Dominican Republic, and they immigrated here in the '60s, and I was born in the mid '70s in the Bronx. And as a kid, my first language was actually Spanish,
Mhm.
and then it was Italian because I lived in an Italian neighborhood in the Bronx, and then eventually I learned English. But if it wasn't for the comic book format, you know, comics book was essential to my learning the language, gaining control and of the language, and how to use certain words and whatnot. Of course, Sesame Street played a big part as well. But yeah, I credit comics in terms of my early life in giving me the structure of vernacular. And then later on in my teens, I came across manga through some characters like Kira
Mhm.
and Fist of the North Star, which was a manga series back in the '90s. And of course, one of my favorites, Gold Go 13, which is a very James Bond esque character. So back before we had the manga craze here, I was already reading manga,
Mhm.
back in the '90s. So
That's amazing. And this whole manga itself is about protecting animals from abusers, which I'm pretty sure is why you decided to have the proceeds go towards animal abuse, which I think is a beautiful way to, just emphasize the platform a little bit more. So can you just elaborate a little bit about that?
right. So very well said. And we're the only publisher that focuses on fighting animal abuse through comics. And
Mhm.
in that capacity, not only do we tell a story about an anti-hero who fights against animal abuse, but we profile charities and organizations, whether they be animal rescue, animal rights, animal welfare, animal care, entities that are vetted to make sure that their program to operations ratio is over 85%. So that when you buy a Here Comes Calico comic book or manga, your money's actually doing a wonderful thing. You're directly fighting against animal abuse while enjoying a pretty compelling story.
That's awesome. That is so beautiful. And, can you take me a little bit through the process of creating the manga from, storyboarding to getting it, to getting the images and then getting it published? Can you take me a little bit through that process?
Sure. Well, it helps to have a fine arts background. So I'm a graduate of the School of Visual Arts, and I used to start all of the stories by doing storyboards first. Typically, a writer, as I am, I'm the writer and creator of Here Comes Calico.
Mhm.
Typically, the writer just creates a script and just hands it off to the illustrator. In our case, we have a couple of artists, and what I initially started doing was doing a storyboard because I can draw, and then I
Mhm.
give that storyboard to the artist. And what the storyboard is a sequence of panels that tells the story, like the script would. But instead
Mhm.
of with words, it would be this general drawing, and then of course the artist takes it and makes it all beautiful. These days, because we're so limited with time, we are a small team. I have to just go for the script. And thankfully, by now, I have such a wonderful relationship with our interior artist, Renato Pinto, who's just incredible. He's able to take my script and very quickly turn around precisely the story that we need. So credit to Renato Pinto for his incredible talent and our communication skills to get this thing going.
That's awesome. And if you do have, an idea, can you tell me a little bit about the feedback from readers?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, that's the wonderful thing about the comic book and manga medium is you're able to try different things. It's like little laboratories, right? So
Mhm.
during in this time of social media, you put out a book, and pretty quickly you have readers giving you feedback about the story and whatnot. So it's this wonderful interaction of living in a social information age.
Mhm.
Okay, so I wouldn't call it social media. I call it information age, with the subset of having social media allowing you to interact directly with customers, and it's a wonderful way of not only telling the story but engaging and feeling the reception from the audience.
The information age. I like that. I I like that. Um, so can you tell us, what is next for Calico? Is there, maybe an animation plan? What's next?
Listen, that would be a wonderful dream. And let me tell you, I'd be eating popcorn there with you watching it. But yeah, I wish. It's very hard. Anime. I don't know if people realize this. Anime takes a lot of money, in some cases millions of dollars, to put together. But the next steps, I would say, immediately in the very near future, would be to finish out the first series, which would be 4 volumes of Here Comes Calico. And by the way, as I mentioned before, the comic book is the series is collected both as a comic book and a manga. So the comic book is 8 sets, 8 comics, and we're currently on issue 6. And the manga would be 4 volumes, and we're currently on volume 1. You get that on Kickstarter, going to Kickstarter.com just by typing in "Here Comes Calico." And we really appreciate the support out there that we're getting. And again, it's the best way to fight animal abuse through comics. So near term, finishing out the first series of manga and comics. Hopefully, we'll get that done this year. I'm pretty confident we'll get that done. And then moving on to next year, starting on a new manga series that stems from Here Comes Calico. It is a story about Hector Gill as a kid before he turned into the Calico. And his moniker there is Green Eye Bandito. And he has a little helper who happens to be a little furry helper for all you animal lovers out there.
Oh, I love that. A little prequel action going on. That is so exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. Long term, yes, manga. I'm sorry, anime. Long term anime, and who knows what else from that. Hopefully, toys, movies. You know how it goes.
Yeah, yeah, that's so exciting. We wish you all the best. So I'd like to thank Dashiell and H.H for taking the time for joining us tonight. And I'd like to thank you guys for watching. And guess what? That's right. We'll see you next week. Stay safe.